hadn't planned on being a facilitator without a voice, but that's what you get. I would like to welcome you to the race class and the labor movement panel, sponsored by the labor branch of Twin Cities Democratic Socialists of America, or TCDSA. I'm delighted to be the facilitator tonight of this amazing program featuring working class fighters and anti-racist activists who are here to share with you their takes on the way that racism is operationalized by the ruling class to diffuse the multiracial, anti-capitalist power building we build in the labor movement. Tonight, we'll be hearing from Amanda Goodman-Berry, life coach, podcaster, and union organizer, and 25-year employee of Delta Northwest Airlines as a baggage handler. She has been a shop steward. She was a shop steward when Northwest workers still had a union before the merger with Delta. Amanda has been organizing for the last 15 years to bring back representation to 18,000 Delta ramp workers and cargo workers. She is currently the leader of the National IAM, a leader in the National IAM Organizing Committee, and which is the largest organizing drive in the United States, fighting to bring back representation to 18,000 Delta ramp and cargo workers. She regularly risks her job with badass job actions against the boss, and on behalf of herself and her coworkers, and the most recent of which she'll be talking to you about tonight, which was to lead a delegation of Delta workers from Atlanta to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, where they called out Delta's fake support for Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy, where they received substantial media attention as a result, which has been like a jolt of electricity through the entire organizing campaign.
Thank you everyone for coming out to spend your evening and over into the night with us. That is greatly appreciated. Like Cynthia said, I'm a life coach, a master life coach, anger management specialist, spiritual life coach, a podcaster, a union organizer, and a little bit of everything, a mother, a sister, and a little bit of all of it. So, as we all know, the subject that I am speaking about today is Delta Airlines fake equity, and a little bit of just about equity, period, as a whole. But I always like to do a little illustration on racism, because it is one of the most hardest things to talk about. So, with a show of hand, who in here like to talk about racism? Well, as you can see, I didn't raise my hand. Because I don't like to talk about racism. But although I don't like to talk about racism, racism is one of the moving factors that has to be talked about. It has to be a conversation, because in order to have a better system, a better America, a better people, a better anything, you have to talk about things when it comes to racism. But as I was preparing to speak to you, I ran across something on Race Forward by President Glenn Harris. He said racial equity is about applying justice and a little bit of common sense to a system that is out of balance. He also said that people of color feel the impact most accurately, but it is clear to be an imbalanced system that makes us all pay. So with racial equity, we have to learn that it doesn't just affect black people, it affects all people. And we all have a job to rectify racism. So as I said before, I don't like to talk about racism. No one does. But you have to talk about it. It has to be in a discussion. So with that being said, what brought me here today is that I wrote a letter against my employer, Delta Airlines, for a video that they played to the flying public, thanks to my coworker Pat Gores, who showed it to me. And I sat with it, I wrestled with it for a few days, and it was just baffling to me. It wasn't that Delta Airlines committed a crime, but Delta Airlines did not bag what they were showing to the flying public. What they showed the flying public was, yes, we support Dr. Martin Luther King. Yes, we support all of this about Dr. Martin Luther King. But they left out the most important thing about Dr. Martin Luther King, what he died for. Anyone in here know what he died for?
It was a union rally, wasn't it?
It was a union rally, exactly.
Sanitation workers?
Sanitation workers, exactly. So, as you know, we took a trip because of that letter. We decided that we wanted to do more than just talk about it. We wanted to be about it. We was going to do better than what Delta Airlines had done. All Delta Airlines had done was made a video with their top executive and none of the workers, none of the rank and files, just their EVPs, their senior VPs, and to our sadness, not even the CEO. Why wouldn't he be a part of a video that was talking about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King? Okay, now me. At that point, I became very frustrated and very angry because Delta doesn't see themselves as racist. Delta may see themselves as diverse. Anyone can be diverse. Inclusive can be anyone. But can you be fair? If there's a Delta, and I like to do this here because you never know who works with Delta or who's for Delta. So if anyone in here that works for Delta Airlines, can you truly say that Delta has done justice as a working towards making sure that all people, especially black people, black indigenous people of color, has felt the fairness of equity? I will speak for myself. I haven't felt that. Out of 25 years plus, and I count all my years. It would be 28 had I not left for 1 year and came back in February. I have never felt the equity of Delta Airlines. I've always had a labor attached to me. So which is why going to Memphis, Tennessee, and having the support of my co-workers, having the support of the IAM, having the support of people who believe in the movement and the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King was the most powerful thing that I had ever experienced in my lifetime. Because we not only did that, we went back to Atlanta, Georgia. We had a press conference where people came out. They listened to our voices. And we retraced the tracks of Dr. King's and how they rode and how they drove and how they laughed, how they talked. And once we got to Memphis, Tennessee, I'm still impacted by what I felt that day standing at the Civil Rights Museum. I don't think I would ever feel the same because where I stood is where he stood. Where we all stood, wouldn't you agree, is where he stood. And I dare Delta Airlines to sit in their big offices, in their big class of rooms or wherever they do, and not go back to the grounds on where he stood at. Dr. Martin Luther King gave his life for unionizing. I want to say that again. He gave his life for unionizing, not for Delta Airlines to only talk about a piece of his legacy. He came back, and as I watched the movie with Kip a couple weeks ago, At the River I Stand, he said something that it will impact me and that I will use. He said to the people, they were worried about him. If he was going to go back to Memphis, Tennessee and help those workers, they was afraid for him. And he said to the people, if I don't go back, what is going to happen to the people? So me writing that letter to Delta, I felt a piece of Dr. King inside of me. If I don't write this letter, what are we going to do? Because Delta going to continue to their propaganda of making people believe that they believe in Dr. King, but not what Dr. King really died for and what he stood for was human right, basic right, the right to assembly, the right to organize. And all of this, is any of all of us here today organizers? Or okay, thank you. Thank you. So you know what it is to organize, and you know what it takes to organize people. So I want to speak a little bit more on how I felt about what they did. There was a word that came into my mind that Delta just hijacked. They hijacked what they wanted to point out about Dr. King. They didn't take the full, if they had taken the full movement of Dr. King, I don't think I would be sitting here. I think I would have said job well done, job well done.
And we would have a union.
And we would have a union. And we would have a union. And I've totally forgot about this paper. And I'm going to do what I always do. I speak from the top of my head. I haven't said one thing that's on this paper, just so you know. So, but I do want to talk a little bit more about Dr. King and what he did. And the reason why we are here today to talk about the importance of organizing and unionizing. Dr. King gave his life as he stood with, was it 1,300, 1,800 sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. So as we retraced those steps and went back to Memphis, Tennessee, I don't think there was a heart in the room that didn't have tears in it. I think all of our soul was pierced because we actually stood, and I highly suggest if you haven't gone, that you go to Memphis, Tennessee and go to that Civil Rights Museum. It is so much in there that you don't get to see, and that we even learn more about. But I do want to ask a question to you guys, since we're all here, and this is wonderful. If you had to put a definition on what racism looked like, could you put a definition on what it looks like? Any takers? That's how bad it is. And that's what it feels like. It makes you mute. It makes you not have a word that you can really say. Being a black woman in America, I am so tired of talking about racism and the right. Delta has an obligation to do what is right. I'm not saying that Delta doesn't do some things right. Absolutely, they do some things right. But the right to organize, the right to give us the opportunity to form a union without interference, the right to have better wages, the right to have better health care, the right to have a better standard living. We deserve that. We all deserve that from our employees, and the employees have to work hard in order to have a sustainable and a rich quality of life. Not rich as in rich, but to be able to pay your bills, to be able to pay your medical, to be able to buy your groceries. We deserve that. And without unionization and without a union, we're never going to see that, because Delta will see us as an at-will employee, and at any time they want to, they will do what they want to do. So what I really want to also bring a lot of voice to is Memphis, Tennessee, and Dr. King, because this is what my piece of this was, and the equity of Dr. King. He didn't fight for just his people. He fought for all people. Dr. King had a different stand. He had a nonviolent approach. And sadly, the one approach that he had cost him his life. But because of Dr. King, I am here today. And it's like the letter that I wrote to Delta. Because of Dr. King, I get the opportunity to speak to white folks in America without having to be afraid. I can only imagine when the words that come to my head, what he must have felt like. I can only imagine. I can only imagine what his family must have felt like. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine feeling in your soul that this could be the end? And it was. So we owe it to Dr. King to fight for union. We owe it to Dr. King to fight to better our lives. Not just the lives of black folks. It's for all folks, all people. He would have wanted that. He didn't say, I want to see my children hold hand in hand with just black. He said black and white. I want to see my children one day stand hand in hand. And I get to stand and hold. Can I hold your hand? This was the dream. This was the dream. Look at the person sitting next to you. That is the dream. So I have a dream. We have a dream. And we have to continue to fight until that dream has come to life. We have to fight to unionize. We have to door knock. We have to do whatever it takes to make sure that what Dr. King fought for, died for, gave his life for, that it does not go in vain. So I know my time is just about up, but I could go on and on because we have an obligation, America. We have an obligation, Minnesota. We have an obligation, the people, to honor the people. It says, together we stand, divided we fall. Who wants to fall alone? Raise your hands. No one wants to fall alone. So I am so grateful that you guys are here today. But there was one thing that also came to my mind as I come to a wrap up. I may have struck the match. I would say Pat struck the match. I lit the fire. But when we all went to Memphis, Tennessee, and Atlanta, we all put the fire out. Would you say, Kim? So you will never see a fireman show up by himself to a burning building. As you can see, all of us in this room today, it would take all of us to put this fire out. So as we continue this organizing and campaigning drive for Delta Airlines, we would love the help of all of you to help us door knock, to help us go out there and get this union. Because together, young, old, middle, it doesn't matter. You matter. We matter. All people matter. Let's come together and help us organize and win this union for Delta Airlines. And I want to thank you for listening to me. And I want to thank you for taking your time to hear my story. And it will be continuing because I am not done with Delta Airlines. They will support what they show to the flying public, that the workers matter. And we should be living by what Dr. King's legacy was. The right to organize, again, the right to have a union, and the right to assembly, our constitutional right. So thank you for having me today, and thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yes.
We are waiting for our third speaker. It's been a bit delayed. So next we're going to hear from Kip Hedges. Hopefully you can hear me. He's a lifelong labor activist and union fighter and local TCDSA leader. Kip was born and raised in Harlem in the 1960s and 70s by parents who were active in the Communist Party. He found out about race and racism from the perspective of someone who was usually the only white person in the room, not to mention at the bad end of a billy club. In numerous civil rights, anti-Vietnam, and pro-labor protests and demonstrations that he found himself participating in. A born organizer, Kip led an anti-war march of high school students across New York City that began as a walkout in his high school cafeteria, led by him and a couple of his friends, and grew into 10,000 students. When Kip moved to Boston after graduating from high school, he continued pursuing his interest in politics, got involved in labor, participated in the Black Panther Defense Committee, and even ran for mayor. Today, he continues a lifelong career as a union organizer. Maybe a different story. Building multiracial power in the Twin Cities labor movement, and is a leader alongside Amanda in the fight to unionize Delta Airlines. And in many ways, he began with a rank and file takeover of his union in the early 2000s. Kip's going to be talking about elite capture, how the powerful took over identity and everything else, to kind of frame up this discussion. And he's going to be kind of referring to this book. There are copies of the book over here. He's also going to be referring to a very important book called The Red Deal. They're out of stock, but you can order them. Indigenous Action to Save Our Earth. Hedges.
Stand. Thank you, Amanda. That was kicked ass. So, a lot of you, I'm sure, have been following the what happened with the UAW strike, where with the new leadership, auto workers who had been just trounced and pounded on for decades rose up and did what they call the stand-up strike, where they would, in order to disrupt the big three, they would pick one plant here, one plant there. The companies would never know which plant or warehouse would be struck next. As a result of that, they won a huge victory. I mean, literally, there are people working at the big three right now that are making $18 an hour, and as of the signing of that contract, went to $28 an hour, and in 3 years will go to $40 an hour. So it's absolutely life-changing, and it shows what happens when workers are united, have leadership that actually wants to fight, and can take the boss to the mat. That solidarity actually pays huge dividends. So the auto companies are very upset about all this. They were flipping out about what to do, how to stop this, how to sidetrack things. They were used to dealing with a leadership that would basically roll over and die in front of them and not protect the workers. And if I mean, I'm sure some of you have seen the T-shirt that Sean Fain, the new president, wears, "Eat the Rich," which is just, you don't see too many labor leaders that are walking around with T-shirts that say "Eat the Rich." So Stellantis, which is basically like they make Jeeps and used to be Chrysler, they decided that a strategy that they would use is they had set up these things called business resource groups. And these business resource groups are like, there was one for black people, there was one for women, there was one for Latinos, there was one for, you get the picture. And Stellantis, just like Delta, would cloak themselves in the language of equity. So they thought that they would use these business resource groups as a strike-breaking tool. They went to the leaders of the resource groups and said, hey, can you get people to volunteer on their weekends to come out to the parts warehouses and do struck work? And the leaders, of course, said, oh, absolutely, that's a great idea. What a good way to use our groups to be strike breakers. Not too many of the, because this is mainly like white-collar workers. It doesn't really exist on the factory floor, probably with good reason, because people wouldn't buy it. So they were not able to recruit too many people. When they would go to the parts warehouses, the striking workers reported that there were very few people on the buses, that they would bus people into the warehouses. So it failed. However, in the past, this has been a regularly used tool of the ruling class of the United States. And unfortunately, all too often, the bad behavior of white workers in discriminating against black workers, immigrants, etc., has led to black workers and immigrant workers being used as strike breakers. I just want to read something out of this book, which is also great, and I think Craig, you have copies of Labor Giant Step here.
On the stock right now.
Okay. So this is 1941. Just so I want to read this real quickly, so you get an idea of like the historical roots of this. So Henry Ford 1941, before the war, Ford is still not fully unionized. It's the last to go. Most important of all, they made, this is talking about the union officials, they said they made no effective move to counter the special final weapon Ford planned to use to break a strike, race hatred. Ford had deliberately and shrewdly established the policy of employing Negro workers at a time when most industries denied them jobs. He set up a special division of personnel for the hiring of colored people. In the spring of 1941, some 10,000 Negro workers were employed by Ford, about 10% of the workforce. He built the idea with careful publicity that he was a special friend and benefactor of the Negro people. He contributed to Negro church groups and influential individuals, and he sought their support in his war against unionism, just like Delta does, particularly in Atlanta. I mean, Atlanta's dominated really by the two biggest companies that dominate Atlanta are Coca-Cola and Delta. And Delta funnels lots of money into the black community. And they buy black politicians. They buy all politicians, whoever they can. As the union movement swept his plants, Ford even staged a banquet in Detroit for 300 people. In attendance was nearly every colored minister in the city who came at special invitation to get the free meal and listen to Marshall's harangue against the CIO. Those Negro ministers in Detroit who expressed sympathy for the CIO were not invited. Okay, so the Ford struggle brought to fore the issue of anti-Negro discrimination and the need for unity of Negro and white workers in common action against the exploiters of all labor. Out of Ford, Bethlehem Steel, and other great union battles came a new awareness of the vital contribution and role that Negro workers can make to the labor movement and the necessity for the labor movement to take the lead in the struggle for full equality and civil rights for the Negro people. Remember, this was written quite a while ago, so that's why the terms are used. But all Ford's wiles, his millions of dollars of publicity, his hundreds of millions of dollars of government financing, his thousands of armed goons, the government's no-strike campaign, the timidity and even treachery of union leaders could not prevail. On April 2nd, 1941, the miracle that many said could never happen did happen. The Ford workers took matters into their own hands. They shut down the Ford empire. When the real showdown came, Ford's elaborate defenses crumbled away. His attempts over the years to form an anti-union bulwark of doubly exploited Negro workers proved useless. Out of 10,000 workers, Negro workers in Ford, less than 1,000 remained in the plant. The April 12th Militant reported that thousands of Negro workers had joined the union right after the start of the strike, and many are out on the picket line side by side with their white co-workers every day. So his efforts failed, but clearly this is something that the ruling class thinks about, plots and plans consciously over and over again. They create the system of capitalism and intertwined with racism, and then they try and reap the rewards for themselves of those divisions and that race hatred. So I want to shift a little bit here and read a quote that kind of shifts us into this whole idea of elite capture, which, as Cynthia mentioned, comes out of this book. Going together, the politics of solidarity, which deference politics provide one flawed model of doing. I don't know if people know what deference politics are. It's where if I'm white, I should shut up because I don't have a right to speak. The politics of solidarity is a good start, going together. But on its own, not enough. We also have to decide collectively where are we going, and then we have to do what it takes to get there. Though we start from different levels of privilege or advantage, this journey is not a matter of figuring out who should bow to whom, but one of figuring out how to best join forces. So think about that. Just kind of let that settle in, and during discussion, people should comment on that, about what they think about that, how they see that interwoven into the movements that we're involved in. Then this book, just another quick quote, trauma-informed thinking has taken over indigenous governments, institutions, nonprofits, revenue streams, and even movements. Like electoral politics, and I agree with this about electoral politics, trauma-based healing sucks all the political and emotional energy out of the room, leaving little space for other possibilities and visions for change. The narrowing of our collective energies into trauma has come at the expense of building vibrant and militant struggles for liberation with other colonized and oppressed peoples of the world. The cunning politics of trauma, I love that phrase, because it's exactly right. It's a cunning politics, has come to define our era, where state and corporate perpetrators of violence and genocide, as in Delta, are asked to or position themselves, like Stellantis, Delta, Amazon, etc., you name it, you see it all over the place, as purveyors of justice, while entirely sidestepping the question of colonialism and imperialism. And put in that union, substitute union busting, etc. I want to talk a little bit about what it looks like on the ground to do something different. And this is something that me and Amanda worked on very closely over the years. So I was on the shop committee for the baggage handlers, ramp workers at Northwest and then Delta Airlines. And I had two absolutely kick-ass class struggle fighters that were part of this three-person team. Dan, who's still there, and Lee Largent, who left the company. We got elected because we wanted to fight the company. And this is our third speaker, Jessica.
Hello, everyone. My apologies, car issues.
So our union, unfortunately, was not very good at fighting the company. They bent over on a regular basis whenever it came to fighting the company. So we got elected based on the idea we are going to be engaged, we're going to do break room meetings, we're going to dig into it, we're going to get the input from workers, synthesize that input, and then come up with a plan to take the company on, because this is 2008, the pretty intense speed up, other attacks going on, and I had been bothering Amanda for a long time to no avail to get involved in the union. And like a lot of black workers, she said, man, the union is not something that I'm looking to for change. And I said, but it's all going to be different. So she became one of the leading stewards on the ramp for the baggage handlers. And one of the things that we decided was that if you're going to have unity on the ramp to take on the company, you must actually stand up for every group of workers out there, because there was African workers, there was black workers, there was Filipino workers, there was women workers, all of whom felt extremely alienated from the union. This pissed, there are definitely some old white guys that were not down with standing up for everybody. And we decided that that's kind of too bad, you know, like we're gonna rock the boat in that way. And so we had some really intense battles, like with a lot of the African workers were in the bag room, and the lead in the bag room was a racist, and I mean like a racist. He distributed assignments and overtime and everything else in a racist way. We did a whole bunch of research on how the assignments were being made. We called a big meeting in the bag room, and we tore this man up. And it changed because of that. And we did that on a series of issues. Black workers, Filipino workers, African workers, women workers. The beginning in 2008, it was just beginning possible to actually be open about being queer on the ramp, standing up for those workers in terms of like harassment and baiting and things like that. The result of this is like the absolute most important lesson in this is that unity, because after a while, some of the older white workers started to kind of, oh, this isn't too bad, you know, like the company's really afraid of us. Like, if they try and do something that we don't like, and there's that red line there, and they step over it, we fuck them up. I mean, we made sure every flight went out late, that bags, sorry to anybody that, you know, you're like, baggage claim, you're waiting there for an hour, it destroys all their statistics. You know, a wide-body flight going to Japan, to Tokyo, hour delay, sorry about that, but it tore them up, and they realized that when we said to the station manager, if you do this, see all those workers out there pointing out the window? You won't see any of them doing what they're doing right now. Oh, is that a threat? No, just saying, that's what will happen. And so then he would shake his head and say, okay, we won't do that. But it came out of our ability to like pull this workforce together across the divisions that were real by standing up for every single one of those workers and not favoring one over another. And I also want to say that, so Amanda and I come out of very different experiences. I am not a black woman. I don't know.
This is supposed to be all black.
I did not, I mean, Amanda grew up in Greenwood, Mississippi, which is where Emmett Till's body was pulled out of the river, which had the highest rate of lynchings of any county in the United States. And that is like Amanda says, the heart of white supremacy in Mississippi and probably the United States. I grew up in Harlem as a white boy, so you know, I mean, neither of us had enormous privilege, but I had more privilege than she did. There's just no question about it. But that never for a moment stopped us and the whole team that we assembled from treating each other as like comrades. That was the key. Treating each other as comrades, coming in at the same level to solve common problems and use the power of the working class at the airport to better everybody's lives out there. And unfortunately, we did lose the union, not because of Minneapolis, but because of a bunch of other things. And we're about to, I think, by May, file for a vote again. So that's full circle. But I wanted to, because Amanda could have said, you know what, Kip, you need to shut up and let me speak because I'm more oppressed than you. But that was never her approach to this. It was always the approach of comradeship in a common fight. So it can happen. It did happen. It has to happen all the time. Part of it what happened because we did not shy away from taking on the real struggles and divisions in our particular workforce. In terms of like the Minneapolis Foundation and other foundations, where the ruling class pumps money into these foundations and then into, because, you know, like Take Action Minnesota, MN 350, Isaiah, Faith in Minnesota, sorry to offend anybody if you're in those groups, but they are set up to derail class struggle. There's simply, in my mind, there's no question about that. And the ruling class funds them because that's what they do. They play that kind of role. They also, I mean, it's a, you know, I'm sure you understand that it's a mixed bag where on the one hand, you must work in coalition with some of these big liberal left-wing nonprofits, but on the other hand, you can't let them set the agenda and take over our movements, because more often than not, that's what happens. I mean, as Nick Estes, who pulled this Red Deal book together, this thing about trauma-informed thinking has taken over nonprofits, institutions, revenue streams, and even movements. And I think we can see that, especially in a metro area like the Twin Cities, where the nonprofit industrial complex, the liberal nonprofit industrial complex, has an outsized or oversized weight in terms of politics in this area. But it happens in, you know, New York, San Francisco, lots of big cities. So just to kind of tie that bow up, starting with the real use of divisions by the ruling class to destroy strikes, working class struggles, down to how the ruling class uses nonprofits in much the same way, insidiously to undermine working class solidarity, unity, and to spread this idea of deference politics, identity politics, and not coming into the struggle as comrades and equals. And I will say that, I mean, there are many times when we were in stewards meetings, and you know, it's a pretty diverse mix of people, and it got heated sometimes. But that's a good thing, because everybody felt like comfortable with it, and somebody got too far out of line. You know, if there's some white guy who started to feel his privilege or whatever, like, you know, you need to like shut up for a little while here. But in general, you know, like I would come in with an idea, and Amanda or Dan or somebody else would say, Kip, that is so stupid. You are so full of shit. And then we would debate it out. And sometimes I would say that to Amanda, like, you are way off. But that is what comes out of struggle around taking on the boss and the ruling class in a real way. So I will stop there, and Jessica can take over.
Okay.
They wanted to show a video from Atlanta.
And Memphis. It's like a 3-minute video.
Great.
before you hit play, can I just say one quick thing? Before she hits play, I didn't say this piece, but it did come to my mind as Pip was talking. They always had a name for me when they saw me coming. Here comes trouble. And
That's from when you were 3.
and it really bothered me. Here comes trouble.
What if the problem isn't having blocks?
Go ahead, Cynthia.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm
Or
sorry.
having it's a shift, or lack.
No, that's okay, and I'll make this quick. But after watching John Lewis, they did a documentary on him. They couldn't have given me a better name. So I want to thank Delta Airlines for calling me Trouble. Because when they did the documentary, there's a such thing as good trouble. So going forward, they're going to see a lot of more good trouble coming their way.
It was set up before, does anyone know how to set this up?
Change the source code.
Let's see. Well, we're not gonna see the video, I guess
Would you like me to start and then maybe you can, after I'm done,
Yeah.
play it?
I'm
You
gonna
wanna
read.
fiddle with it?
Yeah, I'm gonna read it
Okay,
This might be.
Where is the where are you playing the video from?
from a computer.
From the computer? Here, you got the remote again?
Yeah.
Maybe?
He must have gone to sleep.
Yeah, I think it went.
You find it.
I don't know, I think so.
HDMI source down there.
Yeah, I see it. I just, well, what are the sources? Direct TV remote access? Is that what it is? That
I see on the very bottom.
remote PC. Is
That
that
wouldn't be remote access, that's if you're like connecting with an
it looked like that was the only thing that looked like
Can you go down here?
Yeah, I see. Those are the sources.
Oh.
Connection.
All right, well, we're not gonna be able to see it. It was.
It's on YouTube.
Oh, it was on YouTube. Oh, okay. Maybe that's
Then you can type it.
yeah.
Can you type, Delta workers travel to the civil right? Travel, Delta workers travel. Two.
Yeah, around the corner here. Really close to the right. Who said it the first?
We just turned it on and it worked.
Oh, well, there you go.
Two. There it is. Wow.
Ready? Ready?
Ready.
Gotta turn the volume up.
It changes how you eat, how you feel, and how you enjoy life. Because a Clear Choice day changes every day. Schedule a free consultation.
This is the most important and crucial period of your lives, for what you do now and what you decide now at this age may well determine which way your life shall go.
Good morning, everybody. We're heading to Memphis, Tennessee to the Civil Rights Museum. So we'll see you there. Follow us. We'll do you proud.
Hey, let's get this done. We're headed to Memphis, baby. Yeah, we made it.
And we're here to just show that we're here to organize. But I do want to make mention that before we go any further, because of the letter that I wrote to Delta Airlines, I want to make sure, do we have any Delta leadership here? If they're here, can you come forward?
They're not here.
Not here. Okay. So let's carry on. Delta chose not to show up. But I wanted to make sure if they were here, that we gave them an invitation to come and stand with their Delta workers, and they did not show up. Dr. King represented energy, no matter how tired he was, no matter the tireless days, nights he spent. What he brought power, he brought energy to the people. So
we made the trip from Atlanta today to Memphis, like Dr. King made the trip to come support workers. We came to Memphis to help support the sanitation workers who were having grievances with their employer. Just like we're having grievances with our employer, Delta. We're not going to allow Delta to hijack Dr. King's legacy and fancy themselves like they're socially progressive, and they're upholding Dr. King's legacy when they're not adhering to the tenets that Dr. King stood for.
So we owe it to Dr. King to continue to show up and represent his legacy. None of us, am I right, would we be here if it had not been for Dr. King?
So my brothers and sisters at Delta are organized and get what they deserve, some dignity and respect on the job, proper wages, some safety in place. Until everything is done, we're going to be there, we're going to continue to organize, we're going to give them what they deserve.
I come down here and make sure I supported my brothers and my sisters here, trying to organize so that we can have a more secure future once we are organized.
And it's the same thing for us at Delta Airlines. Don't let this just be the end of what we do. We got to continue to push through. We got to continue Dr. King's legacy. We got to continue being the change we want to see in the world.
The people here today that work for Delta are courageous because they're stepping up on behalf of their brothers and sisters, of their siblings, to fight for better equipment, better safety, better health insurance, better wages. The fact that Delta every single day intimidates their workers in a million different ways, and it's time for Delta workers to step up and carry this fight through to the end and to claim the full legacy and mantle of Martin Luther King, who was not just for civil rights, human rights, but for workers' rights as well.
Thank you, Dr. King. Thank you for everything you did so that I could be standing here today, publicly speaking. Thank you so much.
So our slogan must not be burn, baby, burn. It must be build, baby, build.
Thank you. Sorry, sweetie. So finally, I can't read this. Finally, we'll hear from Jessica. I can't do it. You read it.
Jessica Garraway, teacher, board member of Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, Local 59, founder and chair of MFT's Eco-Justice Working Group, and a recent recipient, as of yesterday for real, of her Masters of Urban Education. Jessica has been organizing and writing on matters such as wealth disparity, racism, LGBTQ liberation, women's liberation, labor, and environmental issues for over 10 years, and recently co-authored MFT's first statement on Palestinian liberation. She was active in the fight to stop the building of what would have been the first tar sands mine in the U.S., as well as Keystone, Dakota Access, and Line 3 pipelines. She was also active in the work to address police terrorism, and reimagining public safety in the wake of George Floyd uprising in Minneapolis. Her current work is focused on being active in her union, TCDSA's Education Justice Caucus, and building a strong labor movement that can take on the climate crisis. Jessica will be speaking about the way the local charter school movement has leveraged identity politics to diffuse union power. Jessica.
Hello, everyone. My apologies for my lateness. I had to find something to jump my car, so that's a thing. But I'm so glad to be here today. I just kind of want to set the ground for my union. So we are an established union made up of educators in Minneapolis. So it's an environment where I think a lot of people would call liberal leaning, progressive, what have you. And it's an environment mostly made out of white educators, and we predominantly serve students of color within Minneapolis. And due to that dynamic, I would say it is very susceptible to what I would call liberal identity politics. And I have an experience, and others have an experience, of how this has been used to divide in attempts to conquer our union and set the stage for the charter school movement to take over schooling in this area. So just a brief explanation of the charter school movement. It actually started here in Minnesota. This movement moving away from publicly funded education where there's unions for educators, and moving towards a model where with our public dollars we are funding these for-profit models of education. If you look at the rates of charter school openings and closings, it's close to a third, if not more, of charter schools that close in the first 5 years. This is not a sustainable movement. This is not a movement that, or it's not a movement period, but it's not an approach towards education and addressing economic and racial disparities that has led to any sort of success. And the sad thing is, because of how our public schools have been continuously just defunded, because of the efforts of the ruling class to what's the word I'm looking for? To undermine school integration. People and families of color look towards charter schools as a viable alternative to our current failures within public education because of the ruling class attacks on public education. And what we're seeing is that families, they go to these charter schools, they see how little their children are being served and how unstable these schools are, and then they come back to public education. Yet with this reality, it is really surprising that you have educators within the Minneapolis public schools that are in the union that have an eye towards the charter school movement as a viable alternative to what they care about, which is what we all care about, which is racial injustice within our school system. So we saw this during our strike 2 years ago. The teacher chapter and the ESP chapter went on strike, and a lot of the reason we went on strike was because of historically our low pay, especially for our ESPs, education support professionals, predominantly working class folks of color, and that was a big central point of our strike. And what we saw during the strike, we saw elements trying to undermine solidarity on the basis of people who have connections to the charter school movement, who are being paid by organizations like Minneapolis Foundation and E4E, Educators for Excellence, and making efforts to sow disunity in a period of time where we needed to be united the most. Some of these folks with these connections actually had the goal to run for positions within the union, and people are aware of the connections these people had to E4E and school privatization, as well as some of these members were actually members who crossed the picket line during the strike. Needless to say, they did not get elected, but it's really, what you're seeing is very nefarious in that I strongly feel there's an effort within Minneapolis Public Schools and within our union to destroy it from the inside. So we have to be ever vigilant, one, when we are negotiating and combating with the district, and two, even within our own union, because we need to do a better job as a union to educate around the history of the charter school movement and the fact that this is not a solution to racial disparities that we see. I wanted to address some of the positives we have done as a union. In our contract fight last go around, we actually fought for measures within our contract that would have protections for for teachers of color. There's often been an issue where teachers of color are not retained, one, because of not feeling, on the one hand, not feeling supported and embraced within the school culture, and on the other hand, because we are newly hired, and when there are budget cuts, newly hired, you're the first fired. And so there were initiatives put forward to have protections for new educators of color so that they would not be let go with budget cuts. But at the same time, we fought very hard to make sure that seniority was not eroded, because the district's argument, and they want very much so to strike that from our contract, to get rid of seniority for educators, and we held firm that we want to both protect seniority for educators but also protect teachers of color, and there is currently a legal battle around that provision of protection for teachers of color. It also got a lot of criticism in the broader media and even by left organizations, and my argument to that is that we can have an approach that embraces racial justice and the understanding that our students of color need teachers of color, while at the same time standing for broad class solidarity, and that these are not contradictory ideas. So we did that, and during our last strike, we fought really hard for pay increases for ESPs, education support professionals, a lot of whom are not paid a living wage, that have to get second jobs to support themselves. And we as teachers and ESPs, we went on strike at the same time. And I think there was a big understanding by teachers that we need to keep fighting, of course, for ourselves, but we need to have that solidarity with ESPs, because our schools do not run without education support professionals. And there's no reason why anyone should be doing this important work and not being paid a living wage. And so ESPs did see a significant pay increase as a result of the strike, and I think it's I think both the contract language around protection for educators of color and the solidarity we saw between teachers and ESPs is a great example of a roadmap for the kind of solidarity we need to see in the broader working class around issues of race and pay disparities. Also, as was noted, I am a founder of our Eco-Justice Working Group, and we have done a lot of work building solidarity with the broader community in Minneapolis around ecological injustice. So a couple of those struggles. in the East Phillips neighborhood, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the struggle to instead of tearing down the roof depot, which would have released arsenic into the environment, as well as contributed to pollution due to city trucking. There was a fight to make sure that that space could turn into a community center with a community garden, and programs that would enrich the community instead. Well, that battle was won, and obviously there's ongoing fights. There's ongoing struggle to make sure you're dotting the I's, crossing the T's in terms of the funding and making sure it can be actualized. But our union was a part of that struggle. Folks, especially Cynthia here, organized a wonderful event with members of the community that involved in that struggle at our office in MFT, and I have been told that it was a great. It was really appreciated. It contributed to the struggle, and it showed that we as educators are in solidarity with our with the broader community. And I should say that we as educators work in these environments, so we are impacted when there is pollution in the community. So I think when you're thinking about this as struggles for the common good, it's not just what's good for other people, it's just understanding that what is good for the broader community I serve is good for me as an educator as well, right? Another fight that we're currently involved in is the efforts to close down the Herc incinerator. This is an incinerator located around North Minneapolis that is responsible for high rates of asthma, sickness, death, what have you. But it burns thousands and tons of trash every day. And it was built with the lie that it was ecologically friendly, and that, well, we're not doing landfills, we're burning the trash. Well, there was no respect or understanding that this is the fumes, the result of this burning, it goes into the lungs of black and brown working class people. And I should say we as educators work in this area as well, these areas as well. I work in areas impacted by the hurricane. I live in North Minneapolis. I am impacted by this as well as other educators. And so that work is still ongoing. And I think what that's done, these efforts, is shown that we are committed to community. We are committed to the broader good of the communities in which we serve. That being said, there have been some pushbacks around some of these efforts that we have been involved in. And I want to get into some of the ongoing issues and things that we need to address going forward. Some of these efforts around both including some racial justice, ecological justice in our contracts and in the work we do has received pushback saying, well, what does this have to do with us as educators? We should just be focused on the bread and butter demands of higher pay and healthcare and things of that nature. And I think this really came out with controversy over our Palestinian Solidarity Resolution. I co-wrote with another member of our teacher chapter a resolution that just to give a brief overview, it said that we mourned the loss of innocent life on both sides, and then it proceeded to really center this blame on the occupation by Israel, calling it what it is, which is a settler colonial state engaging in genocide. And we also called for the repeal of anti-boycott, divest, sanctions legislation in Minnesota. People may not be aware, but in Minnesota, government agencies are banned from being able to form business connections and do business with businesses that participate in BDS, right? And so we included that in our contract, or sorry, not our contract, in the resolution. And it caused a lot of dissension. It got a lot of media attention. We faced claims of anti-Semitism from organizations committed to the occupation in the Twin Cities, as well as members of our own union who claimed that it was anti-Semitic. And through that controversy, our last meeting, we had a lot of back and forth around one, claims of anti-Semitism, but I think towards the end, it actually leaned far more towards, this is just too complicated, this is beyond what we should be focusing on as a union. And ultimately, they passed a resolution, not to repeal the former resolution, but basically saying, well, we need to be centered on, the issues that impact us as educators, and we're going to apologize for any harm caused to Jewish community members because of the resolution. And, I took that really hard. It was really difficult to see that. But there were important lessons learned through that. One is that, the lesson I learned was that we need to center, or we need to be committed to internationalism. I still stand that as workers within unions, we are not limited to just our pay and our health care. To be truly successful as a working class, our solidarity has to go beyond that, and we have to have a transformative vision of what labor is, of what we want as workers and as unions. That being said, you have to do the work to build political consciousness amongst your co-workers. And that is something I would have had a lot more focus on in terms of just having the ongoing conversations, having educational events, what have you, and then leading up to a potential vote on a resolution. Also, shaming is not a strategy, and I think this book, the little I've looked at this book, Elite Capture, and obviously a lot of us here have showed that's a liberal approach towards addressing racism, that we can shame people into not being racist, and that's not a strategy, right? So and even as radicals, there is a sense where there's a lot of, in the anti-capitalist radical movements, we've been negatively conditioned with a liberal approach towards addressing racism that doesn't embrace broader working class solidarity. And so what I would say is, if we want internationalism and we want anti-racism within our unions, we have to have the hard conversations with members. We have to understand that it's an ongoing process. This doesn't mean we abandon that struggle. We will not, and we cannot. But we have to put in that work, right? And in general, there's a lot of political education that has to go into bargaining for the common good demands. And I would argue we need to also emphasize that what is good for the common good, be it ecological justice issues or housing, what have you, is good for us as workers, and I'm thinking particularly within our union. Marcia Howard, who is the vice president of our union and who holds down George Floyd Square, a couple of things that she often says, and we say as a union, is that our students' living conditions are our working conditions. The idea that we can have this divide between the issues in the community and the issues that we face as educators is nonsensical. It's not going to work. And that is something that those of us who are leaders in the union, we need to work with our co-workers around understanding this. We need to increase political education on this. And finally, another thing that Marcia Howard says, obviously, yeah, she's a powerhouse in our union. She says the cruelty is the point. When we're talking about the attacks on public education, on both our students and us as educators, oftentimes you would hear educators say, what are they doing? Why would they do this? This clearly doesn't serve our classrooms. This clearly doesn't, the attacks that they're making on us and denying really cogent and reasonable demands, it doesn't make sense. That's exactly the point. It doesn't make sense because the cruelty is a point. And I will say, I think there is an ongoing effort to destroy public education from the inside out. And getting our coworkers and our fellow workers to understand this is, I think, pivotal for us. This and as well as the connections between what is happening here in our broader community, what's happening here, what's happening in Palestine, is really going to be the way forward for what is going to be necessary to make the victories we need to make to protect public education and make sure that education for all educators is a profession that is going to lead to the quality of life that we all deserve, and ultimately building a broader movement to take on racialized capitalism and overthrow that for once and for all. Thank you.
Okay, Cynthia still has